Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro Moros denounced that a group of criminals recently captured in the country was financed and trained by Colombian paramilitaries. The Bolivian justice annulled the trial against the former de facto president Añez, which was set for this Thursday in the case known as coup d'etat 2. In Khartoum, Sudan, citizens returned to the streets rallying against the military coup. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. On Thursday, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro Moros denounced that a group of criminals recently captured in the country was financed and trained by Colombian paramilitaries. According to the Venezuelan head of state, this group intended to set up a paramilitary base to attack the capital city of Caracas, under the order of Iván Duque. President Maduro denounced that these irregular groups were financed and trained by the Colombian government. In this context, Maduro assured that the country's security forces continue working to mitigate the presence of the so-called Tancol and against organized criminal gangs to safeguard the security and the integrity of the Venezuelan people. Context, the Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro Moros reported that those captured in Tejeras in Aragua state gave statements on how they were trained in Colombia to attack Venezuela.
El Coqui and all these people who did so much damage to the people of Caracas were trained, financed and directed from the narco-paramilitary government of Iván Duque. Many of those captured now testify in what cities in Colombia they were, what training they received after Colombia, how El Coqui entered Venezuela and why they placed him in Tejerías, how they were preparing a paramilitary base in Tejerías to attack the highway, to attack the city of Caracas at a given moment, under an order from the narco-paramilitary Iván Duque.
On Thursday in Mexico, the Congress debated the energy reform promoted by President López Obrador to recover sovereignty over this strategic resource. The objective of the proposal made by the president seeks to recover the sovereignty and regulatory capacity of the state over the exploitation of the country's strategic resources. The president asserted that a disinformation campaign is trying to distort the objectives of the initiative and hide the political and economic interest of the power groups that benefit from these reforms made by the previous governments, and also said that the proposal underway includes the participation of social movements, suppliers, and opinion leaders. In Guatemala, the Court of High Risk ordered the judicial recollection of 2 covered ditches in the military encampment of Cobán, Alta Verapaz, as part of the process against an ex-commissioner from the military. Our correspondent, Santiago Botón, tells us more about it.
Families of the genocide victims leave offerings and summon a spirit at the gates of the military headquarters in Cobán, Alta Verapaz. Meanwhile, inside the facilities, the court issues the judicial recognitions of 2 covered corpse pits. Inside of them, the expert from the Foundation of Forensic Anthropology informed there were 536 people, all with signs of illegal execution: boys, girls, women, men. In total, 14 covered corpse pits were exhumed between 2012 and 2015 at the request of relatives and surviving victims of the genocide.
My husband's remains were found here in the military sector 21, which is now Creon Paz. In 2016, my husband's remains were identified. He was kidnapped on January 13, 1983.
Among the 536 skeletons found, the remains of 3 farmer peasants from Tactic, Alta Verapaz, were exhumed. These bones paved the way for the trial against the military ex-commissioner José Manuel Castañeda Aparicio for the crime of forced disappearances. 6 years ago, he identified one of the 3 people who disappeared in this place. This is clearly an undeniable proof of his involvement with the responsibility of the state security forces, especially during the years of repression in the 1980s. Prosecutors of the public ministry and litigants have requested that the ex-commissioner be sentenced to 120 years in prison. a process delayed since 2014 according to the victims' relatives. We want justice, for justice to truly be here with us as survivors that we are of the armed conflict, and we want the state to take up its part again, to acknowledge its mistakes and to compensate the victims. The military, at the moment, forbids the access of several journalists to the site, so they couldn't record the judicial recollection of the court speech.
Santiago Botón, TeleSUR Norte de Guatemala.
Thank you, Santiago, for this report, and now we continue to other stories. Brazil's Chamber of Deputies approved a bill that makes the use of pesticides even more flexible, which many opponents criticize as they warned of the dangers to the human health. By 301 votes in favor and 150 against, with 2 abstentions, the main draft of the so-called Safer Food Bill was approved by government officials and representatives on the agricultural sector. Opponents dubbed it the Poison Bill. Supporters of the proposal said it is to reduce bureaucracy and give more transparency to the approval of these substances. Critics of this law reject the proposal determines the Ministry of Agriculture as the only body in the regulation of new pesticides. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. Bolivian justice annulled the trial against former de facto president Janine Añez, which was set for this Thursday in the case known as coup d'etat 2. The opening of the trial against Janine Añez and others involved in the case coup d'etat 2 was left without date because of the first anti-corruption court of La Paz left without effect at the beginning of this judicial process. Once the hearing began, a process of prior considerations was opened in which some of the parties involved requested that the hearing be held in person. In the vicinities of the court, pro-Añez demonstrators faced others who demanded her imprisonment and justice after the massacres of Sencara and Secaba. Two military members of the Añez government, Jorge Terceros, the commander of the Air Force, and Palmiro Jarjuri, the former commander of the Navy, with decisive roles during the coup d'etat of November 2019, requested a summary trial, which means that they recognize the responsibility or guilt. The Bolivian Minister of Justice, Ivan Lima, offered statements in this regard.
A trial has begun for violation of Constitution. A trial has begun for breach of duty against 2 people who have been declared rebels and contumacious to the law. I am referring to the former commander of the National Armed Force and the former commander of the National Police. They have not showed their faces. They are not showed up. They are fugitives from justice. And the other military men who, together with Mr. Añez, have been tried, have been already acknowledged and have submitted in writing their request for abbreviated proceedings. This is important news for the country. There are 2 people, Jarjuri and Terceros, who have asked the prosecutor's office to issue a sentence through abbreviated proceedings. This is an acknowledgement of responsibility of guilt.
Now we continue to other topics. In Moscow on Thursday, during a press conference, Russian President Vladimir Putin backs Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. Putin gave strong backing to his Kazakh counterpart in this pair's first meeting after the crisis stopped in Kazakhstan. Russia, together with the Collective Security Treaty Organization, appeared to bolster Tokayev to curb the internal clashes and the violence that the Kazakh president classified as the work of bandits and international terrorists. Tokayev also stressed his support for Russia's position on the indivisibility of security in the Eurasian space, as tensions mount between Russia and the West.
Thanks to the strong position of President Tokayev and the resolute support of Russia and all of its CSTO allies, the situation in Kazakhstan was brought under control in the shortest time possible. Law and order were restored, and peace and tranquility returned to Kazakhstan. Tokayev is now doing everything he can to ensure that the situation becomes finally normal. We can see that life in Kazakhstan has returned to a stable, calm course. There is full support in society for the course of the country's leadership towards solving large-scale tasks. and we in Russia, for our part, will do all we can to support the President of Kazakhstan. The Russian Federation plays an extremely important role in ensuring stability and security in our region. I would like to say that we support Russia's position on the indivisibility.
Now we move on to other topics. In China and other Asian countries, celebrations for the arrival of the Lunar New Year were accompanied by new outbreaks of COVID-19. The most complicated situation is in Hong Kong, with the highest number of cases since the beginning of the pandemic, while South Korea, Singapore and Indonesia are also facing an increase in cases. Our correspondent Iramzi Peraza has the story.
Many Asian countries are facing an increase in COVID-19 infections after the Lunar New Year festivities. Specialists warn that the number will continue to rise in the coming weeks as they deal with the highly transmissible Omicron variant. In China, where the situation is most under control, some 3.6 million people are under quarantine in the city of Baise, near the Vietnamese border, after new cases of COVID were detected. To date, less than 200 infections have been reported in that city, but the severe measures are a response to a zero-tolerance policy applied by China every time at least one infection appears, which has allowed it to control the spread of the disease. Where everything seems more complicated is in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, in southern China. And local authorities announced the most severe restrictions since the beginning of the pandemic, as the Omicron variant in the city has caused a major outbreak that has led to a record of more than 1,000 cases per day. Besides, that international financial center also recorded its first COVID-related deaths since September last year. The new strategy applied in Hong Kong involves drastic measures, such as the confinement of residential complexes for testing when outbreaks occur, strict quarantines for travelers, and the closure of non-essential businesses. In the rest of Asia, the daily count of new coronavirus cases in South Korea surpassed 50,000 for the first time on Thursday, amid the rapid spread of the Omicron variant. In this context, the country's health authorities presented a self-treatment scheme for patients with mild symptoms of coronavirus in order to free up resources and medical professionals to treat more severe cases. On its part, Singapore also saw a dramatic increase in infections, and restrictions were implemented, including limited seating for restaurants and requests to avoid large crowds of people. Meanwhile, Indonesia, which is also facing a new wave of infections, is accelerating the application of booster doses of COVID-19 vaccines in people over 18 years of age. The country also began human testing of its own vaccine against the virus, called red-white after the colors of the national flag, after obtaining authorization from the National Health Agency. This is the situation today on this side of the world. We'll be back with more news from the Asian continent in the next few days. Till then.
Thank you, Ramsey, for this report, and we'll take a final short break. So join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. In Khartoum, Sudan, on Thursday, citizens returned to the streets rallying against military coup. Thousands of Sudanese took to the streets in latest mass rally protesting against last year's military coup that upended a transition to civilian rule. Crowds waved flags and chanted slogans, warning each other to keep a lookout for security forces who launched deadly crackdowns on previous rallies, leaving at least 75 and 79 people killed. Regular mass protesters rocked the Northeast African nation since the October 25th military takeover led by Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. The power grab derailed a fragile power-sharing arrangement between the army and the civilians, a deal negotiated after the 2019 ouster of Omar al-Bashir. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa delivered the State of the Nation address. For the first time since their return to democracy, it was held outside the South African Parliament, following the fire that destroyed the National Assembly in January. Ramaphosa admitted that the country's socio-economic situation is unsustainable and unacceptable. It's one of his most self-critical speeches to date. The president gave a stark review of the deep difficulties facing the country that prevent improvement in socio-economic indicators, from the slow fight against corruption to the severe electricity crisis that periodically subjects South Africans to power cuts. He also accepted the government's blame for the outbreak of unrest in South Africa in July last year. And the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa quotes the report about the July 2021 riots published this week, saying government's initial handling of the July 2021 events was inept and blames poor police operational planning. He acknowledges the recommendations of the panel for the government to take overall responsibility for the events.
Disturbing picture of the capabilities of our security services and the structures that exist to coordinate their work. The report concludes that government's initial handling of the July 2021 event was inept, police operational planning was poor, there was poor coordination between the state security and intelligence services, and police are not always embedded in the communities that they serve. The panel found that Cabinet must take overall responsibility for the events of July 2021. Now, this is a responsibility that we acknowledge and we also accept.
On a recent visit to Tel Aviv, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock on Thursday convened to the Israeli authorities the need to revive the peace talks with the Palestinians as soon as possible, since the current situation is not sustainable.
Dear Year, also this government is of the opinion that the negotiated two-state solution is still the best option for the peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians. On the way there, we think that it is important to build trust. I find it important to say, here and now, that we are constantly checking the structure of our executing agencies so that we can definitely and 100% exclude financing of terror by means of the foreign minister. At the same time, human rights and a strong civil society are a priority for the federal government, especially here in the Middle East, and we want to further engage in the Palestinian civil society. We have intensely discussed this in the short time that we had.
In Beijing on Thursday, China's Ministry of Commerce spokesperson Gao Feng announced China and Ecuador officially launched negotiations on a free trade agreement which will promote bilateral trade and investment. According to Feng, this agreement is expected to bring the bilateral trade to a new high level. China will work with Ecuador to actively advance relevant negotiations in accordance with consensus reached by both heads of state. The signing of the agreement will help further unleash the potential of bilateral trade, improve the quality and scale of trade, promote the sustainable, stable and diversified development of bilateral trade, and bring tangible benefits to the businesses and people of the two countries. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.